Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei Fell in Love with Uzumaki Kushina Movie 1. Before we start, please go support Au.Moonbw for writing that awesome fanfic. Chapter 1. Red Meets Crimson. Kushina walked down the street with her umbrella, fully enjoying the weather. It wasn't ideal, but she liked an occasional rainy day. Inevitably, a few drops landed on her hair, but it seemed to serve to make her even more beautiful. Even after having a child, she still looked the same young woman that she was before. The day was calm, apart from the rain. She had decided to go around her niece's territory to see how she was doing and to also take the opportunity to look around the city. Everything was fine until a young man showed up as she turned around the street. His breathing was ragged, he was soaked from the rain, and his shirt was soaked in blood. He seemed to be walking for a long time, aimlessly. But what the most eye-catching thing for Kushina was the red gauntlet on the boy's hand. A boy that should be almost of the age of her niece and son. The boosted gear, one of the 13 Longinus. Hi to Issei, having just lost his family to a stray devil, barely surviving in the process. His eyes showed the trauma, but also the resignation. At that moment, he wondered if, after failing to protect his family, does he even had a reason to stay alive. His answer came through that woman with crimson hair. "Hello," Kushina said without thinking twice. A small ray of sunlight that came from the window, that managed to pass thanks to the tiny opening in the curtain, was enough to wake Kushina up. She blinked a few times, remembering the dream she just had. Her first encounter with her pawn. Kushina only needed to slightly turn her face to see Issei, who was sleeping peacefully next to her. It was a vast contrast to the state he was in when they originally met. She gently runs her index finger across the Sekirute's cheek, who continues to peacefully sleep. The Redeed couldn't resist the smile that formed on her face. After all, it was good that things had calmed down, if only for now. At least, Issei was arguably much better than before. At that time, having just awakened the boosted gear and lost his family, he was confused, scared and aimless. And Kushina was someone who understood the pain of losing a loved one, but she also understood that the Red Dragon Emperor in that state was an easy target for either being slaughtered or captured by other factions. Letting that happen to him, who had already lost enough, was not something she was going to accept. "Want to become a devil?" she asked 3 days after they met. One of the benefits of having her niece practically run the city and being from one of the wealthiest families in the underworld is that she was able to pick and choose wherever she wanted to stay in Kuo. On the first day, Issei didn't react much, mainly because of the shock. He started to improve by the second day, doing some basic activities around the house. It was at the third day, when he didn't look as bad, that Kushina stopped to explain to him the basics of the supernatural. "What?" And after all that explanation, she asked a question, which left the already confused and lost Issei even more confused. Looking back at it, maybe it wasn't the best decision to ask the question right after all the explanation. "And if you join my peerage, you will be under my protection." She almost commented on how that would turn him into her family, but after what he'd been through, that part was best left for later. "But I don't know. Drake told me about the White One. Won't I be causing problems? And after you help me?" It was clear that he was filled with doubts, but also guilt over what had happened. Kushina couldn't help but compare Issei at that moment to a lost puppy. "Don't worry," she said, pulling him into a hug, which caught the user of the boosted gear completely off guard. But. At first, Issei even tried to get away from the hug, but Kushina's strong grip, plus the soft feeling of her body being pressed to his, made him give up quickly. "Shhh, it's going to be okay," she said, running her fingers through his hair. Issei wasn't sure when, but at some point, he started to cry. Please. I don't want to be alone." Kushina didn't respond, she just continued to run her finger over Issei's hair to calm him down. She had already made her decision. The fact that it took 6 pieces to transform Issei took her by surprise. Even though she was an ultimate class devil, it still took almost all of her pawn pieces. It just showed the power and potential of a Longinus. Potential she intended to explore to the limit and further. Issei was in his first year of high school, but he would be out of school for some time to recover from what happened. "A healthy body means a healthy mind," Kushina said proudly, with crossed arms. Issei just looked at her, not knowing how to respond. "What?" A vein threatened to pop on the Redeed's forehead, but she ignored it and continued. "Ice, now that you are part of my peerage, I can't let you stay as you are. Haha, turning the Red Dragon Emperor into a battle monster is going to be fun." Issei felt a shiver run down his spine, and for some reason he felt like he should prepare for an excruciating amount of physical pain. At least Kushina's smile made him believe it would be worth it. "I don't want to disappoint her," he thought to himself, with slight blushes on his cheeks. "Let's go then?" Redeed asked excitedly. "Yes." Issei felt that if it was for her, his savior, he would be capable of anything. I didn't think this was anything. It didn't take long for the chestnut to understand what that bad feeling he had felt was. At the moment he was climbing a mountain with giant hawks with talons that could cut him like paper behind him. And all the while, Kushina climbed up the mountain as well, just a few meters ahead, to keep an eye on him. "Come on Ice, you're doing well, you didn't die yet," she said, looking like she was in high spirits. "And that is a compliment." Boost. As soon as the boost's announcement was given, he threw himself to the side, going at least 5 meters to the right of where he was before. In the second after he did that, the place where he was attacked by one of the hawks, causing a cut that was probably a meter long to form in the wall. Arg horse. Before, as he was promoted to Rook, he had some facility climbing the mountain, but now changing to Knight, firstly he found it harder to keep gripping the rocks, but at the same time he felt more agile. This agility, which added to the previous boosts that were about to end, allowed him to at least climb a few more meters. There were some cuts on his back, arms and legs, but no deep injuries that would really stop him, because Kushina would have already stopped the training if that had happened. But, as his boosts would only last for a few more moments, the training would end there. There were a few meters left for him to reach the entrance to the top of the mountain, but Kushina thought that it would not be possible, in his current condition, for him to continue. Even so, he did really well. I didn't expect him to make it this far on the first day. Iridi thought to herself, smiling, proud of Issei. Ice, it's already good. Bishop. But just because it was enough for her didn't mean it was enough for him. Issei refused to do anything that didn't meet or exceed his master's expectations. Although, according to Kushina, he had the most ridiculously low amounts of demonic energy she had ever seen, using Bishop along with his boosts allowed him to have a decent amount. Iridi also felt draconic energy coming from him and she already had plans to make him focus on that instead of trying to use demonic energy. She even had the perfect person in mind to train him in that regard. The elder Gremory watched with curiosity to know what Issei's next move would be, especially since he didn't have the backing of a Rook's strength or a Knight's agility. But when she saw Issei just let go of the rocks and start to fall, she nearly had a fit. She was about to jump and probably break the mountain in half in the process to save him when she saw him gathering what must have been all the demonic energy he had in the palm of his hand. Amehea. The energy went downward and served as a booster of sorts, throwing him meters into the air until he landed in the edge of the mountaintop. The boosted gear disappeared from his arm, his lungs burned as if they were on fire, every single one of his muscles screamed, having been used to an extent they had never been before. And even with that, Kushina saw on Issei's face the biggest and most sincere smile she'd seen since they'd met. "I did it," he declared victoriously, making a peace sign with his right hand. "I know. I'm proud, Ice." And for Issei, that was all he needed to hear. When he woke up again, he was still on top of the mountain, but his body felt much better. He also noticed that his head felt like it was on something soft, just as he felt soft and gentle fingers running through his hair. It didn't take long for him to realize that his head was lying in Kushina's lap. "I'm sorry," he said, jumping off her lap and feeling his face burn like it was on fire. "So, you woke up, Ice." Kushina's voice sounded sweet and peaceful. Issei took a deep breath and calmed down, turning to face his master. Who actually had fire in her eyes and a furious expression. "What was this idea of throwing yourself? Do you think you can do whatever you want without worrying? Wanted to give me a heart attack? Well, I can't even have one." She screamed and said much more, all while dragging Issei from side to side so that she would have the opportunity to let her frustration out. "You understood?" After what Issei guessed was at least half an hour, she finally stopped screaming, with her face only millimeters apart from Issei's. Though that made him even redder, the proximity making his heart beat like crazy, he firmly nodded his head. "Yes, I'm sorry, I just didn't want to disappoint you." He spoke the last part, looking away from her. Kushina frowned at that small reaction, but for the moment she let it aside. She placed her hands on his shoulders and made him face her again. "Ice, I know you won't let me down." She sighed. "I also exaggerated a bit, it's normal to take risks, just try to minimize them or let me know beforehand." He nodded. "Alright. And thank you, Kushina-sama." Iridi rolled her eyes and lightly flicked his forehead. "Call me Kushina, fool." She spoke, grinning at him. And Issei felt his heart skip a beat. Horrible things had happened, but he couldn't say he hated what was happening now. "What are you thinking?" A sleepy voice pulled the redeed from her memories. She turned to see Issei rubbing his right eye, doing his best not to wake up Asia who was sleeping on top of him and the other girls who were sleeping around him. Kushina tilted her head, allowing her lips to meet Issei's. They enjoyed the kiss for minutes, exploring each other until Kushina pulled her head back, smiling. Just remembering a few things. Chapter 2. Acquiring experience. It had been a week since the training in the mountain. Issei could say it was the most dangerous week of his life, but he would also be lying if he said it were not one of the most fun, thanks to Kushina. She teased him, cheered him on, and kept him company at all moments, even as he fought for his life. Of course, when he needed it, Kushina left him alone. After all, it had been a very short time since his life had changed drastically with the loss of his family, so he needed moments alone. Except that, outside of those situations, Issei spent most of his time fighting for his life. Unknown monsters, creatures that had little recording in the mythologies. Urban legends. Beings from different regions, with totally different powers. During that 1 week, Issei witnessed and faced these types of creatures. There were wolves that moved through shadows, ogres that wanted to stop someone from crossing bridges, and all sorts of oddities. Kushina saw, why am I fighting all these random guys? On the third day Issei curiosity made him ask the redeed. She put her index finger to her chin, looking thoughtful for a second before answering him with a big smile. During that short process, Issei could only repeatedly say in his mind how beautiful she was. Well, I wanted to give you a more formal training, but I don't think you would survive it as you are now. She spoke with that same big smile, while Issei felt a chill run down his spine. Ah. I what? The redeed doesn't seem to notice his condition and continues. Yes, that's why I'm preparing you this way. You will get basic experience, and your body will be able to withstand the future training. She spoke, her eyes almost glowing. I understand. Issei suddenly felt that things would only get tougher and tougher. Yeah, so, to start for real, we have to finish this soon. So back to training. She said, with a friendly face and a smile, as she lifted a huge boulder to throw towards Issei. One thing, however, the redeed had to admit, it was that it seemed to be a constant for Issei to exceed the expectations she had imagined. Her plans for him always took into account Issei's limit, after all, boosted gear user or not, he had only recently been reincarnated as a devil. All the training was just for him to get used to it, and yet, Issei seemed to refuse to do anything but impress her. Whenever he was in a situation that didn't seem to have an easy way out, he found some creative solution, either using what he had around him, the boosted gear, his evil pieces, or a combination of all these factors. From the fourth day Issei no longer just ran away from battles against creatures that were dozens of times his age, if not centuries. He, despite still running away, tried to put up a fight, or did a little bit of both. But it wasn't long before he started winning every match he was a part of. For example, as he faced off against one of the descendants of the Beast of Javadan, he used the ability of his boosts and his newly acquired capacity to transfer to exploit the beast's heightened hearing, creating such a high sound frequency through the boosts, and simply by clapping his hands, giving himself the opportunity to kill the monster who was momentarily defenseless. That surprised Kushina. He had handled the situation with less trouble than she had imagined. Another example was when he had to fight a headless horseman, when Kushina randomly decided that she wanted to wander around the countryside in the middle of the night. I'll be rooting for you, Issei-kun. She gave him a thumbs up as she sat under a tree and started eating a sandwich. Despite her casual attitude, Issei could sense that she was ready to interfere at any moment. Any suggestion? The chestnut one asks the being in his soul. The Red Dragon Emperor. A few, but just saying them to you wouldn't have any effect. Try to discover them yourself. Though it had been a short time since his awakening, Drake was having interesting experiences with his new host. All of the previous ones either ignored him, barely spoke to him, or were easily absorbed by the Red Dragon's power, eventually getting lost and crazy. Issei did not display any of these traits so far. He was by far the most communicative host Drake had ever had. They talked to each other more than Issei talked to Kushina. Furthermore, while clearly impressed by the boosted gear's powers, he wasn't particularly obsessed with it, even trying his best to focus on the other options his evil pieces gave him. And to top it off, Issei showed zero interest in the conflict against Albion. He had made it clear that if the hacker Yuiku appeared in front of him looking for a battle, he would give said battle away, but that rivalry was not of his interest. Is it because of the Gremory? Braig asked, not disappointed, quite the contrary in fact. That was one of the things that made him even more interested in Issei. The boy in question smiled slightly. She saved me. I don't want to drag Kushina into this conflict that has nothing to do with her. Sorry, that must be disappointing for you, right? But in response to Issei, Drake chuckled. Ha, very good, I am not disappointed, on the contrary. Fufu, I believe this will be interesting. Do as you wish, partner, I will watch with interest. After that day, Issei felt a little closer to Drake. Very well then. Back in the battle against the Headless Horseman, the Sekiryuite had his full focus on his opponent. Two of the most notable things about the rider were the speed at which he moved and the control he had over his horse. The maneuvers he was doing didn't seem to be of someone who simply commanded the horse, it was almost as if he controlled it perfectly with his mind. Acua. That was the laugh that came out of the flaming head that the knight held with his left arm. In his right hand he holded a long sword. If my memory is correct, this sword is like the blade of the Reapers, but very much weaker. It doesn't have the same soul-injuring power as the weapons of Hades' servants. Well, of course, for a normal human it is still deadly, but in your case, it will just be painful and not life-threatening. Braig explains to Issei as the knight makes his first attack. You should have started with that. He yelled and Kushina knew he was talking to the red dragon. During all this time she spent with Issei, at no point had she communicated with the dragon, and neither Braig seemed particularly interested in talking to her. Promotion nigged. Noting that his opponent far surpassed him in speed, Issei decided that he would even the field, promoting himself to knight. Boost. The boosted gear announcement sounded and Issei got even faster as he tried to escape the Headless Horseman's constant attacks. The boosted gear's abilities coupled with the evil piece's specialization was a combination with frightening potential and, as it was the first time for Drake to have his host turned into a devil, it was uncharted territory even for him. Acua. That said, the horseman's speed was impressive and after a few moments dodging, Issei suffered a cut, though not too deep, on his shoulder. But that simple cut was enough to stop him completely. He felt like every nerve in his body had been hit and a dizziness that made him believe that his head could explode at any moment hit him. DSC, the effect is stronger than I imagined. Kushina was already on her feet again, ready to interfere at any moment. The knight didn't stop and was already attacking again, from a different direction this time. However, the Sekiryuite gritted his teeth and did his best to ignore the pain and sensations that afflicted him. Boost. The feeling of power filled him again, and Issei managed to move in time to stop the blade, which was few centimeters away from his face. Acua. But since he was as a knight and not a rook, he lacked strength to stop the horseman from pulling his sword back. Damn it. Gritting his teeth, Issei went for the attack, being extra careful with the sword, avoiding the slightest cut as much as possible. Thankfully, his speed reflected in his reaction speed, and despite having to avoid being slashed, his boosted gear was the perfect defense mechanism, stopping the blade when Issei couldn't escape. Boost. It didn't take long for the Headless Horseman to notice that there was something wrong with his opponent as Issei got stronger and stronger. Issei was sure that if he were human, Kushina's training would have already killed him, but since he was no more, besides being the wielder of the boosted gear, it had only served to make him stronger. He didn't know what his boost limit was, although he believed being near it already, but that didn't matter, as in just under a minute, he had bested the Headless Horseman. The horseman's speed, which a minute ago Issei could only keep up with difficulty, seemed slow to him now. His eyes saw the horse's every movement clearly. Kua. The knight screamed in what sounded as despair as he charged at Issei, but the chestnut dodged without difficulty and appeared behind him. Draconic shot. The Sekiryuite declares, making the gesture of a gun with his left hand. Draconic energy accumulated in his fingertip, forming an orange-sized sphere, which was shot towards the horse's back left leg. Again, Kushina witnessed that despite his low levels of demonic energy, Issei had draconic energy that would put him near the top of the low class of dragon rank. The shot hit and the horse staggered, stopping the horseman's escape. By chance. Issei thought, running and then jumping to throw himself at his opponent. Promotion rook. In the moment before jumping, Issei switches to a physically stronger piece to deal more damage. But to his surprise, just as he would hit the rider and the horse, for a moment, they disappear in a dark smoke as he goes straight through, falling to the ground. It's one of their skills. They are able to briefly enter the spirit world, losing contact with this physical plane and not being hit by any attacks. However, it's only for a brief moment and it's not an ability they can use much, plus he can't move during this time. I wish I had heard this sooner. Because of the previous boosts, the force of Issei's fall caused a crater in the ground. The horseman returned in the next instant and was ready to bring his sword down to slash the Sekiryuite. Promotion knight. As his previous attempt failed, Issei returned to what was already working before. Using his speed, that had not been lost since the boosts remained, he dodged the attack and took distance from the horseman. Let's get this over with. Running around the Headless Horseman, Issei hit him with draconic shot after draconic shot. The horseman couldn't dodge the attacks that were coming from all directions. He tried to use his ability to disappear into the spirit world twice, but Issei noticed beforehand and waited for him to return before attacking again. Both horse and rider were hit from all sides, head, neck, stomach, shoulders, arms, and then, the hand in which he held his sword was hit, and he dropped it. It was instinctive reaction, and Issei quickly caught on to it. Guayaya. The Sekiryuite didn't need the devil's magic over different languages to understand that it was a scream of hatred, but it didn't matter to him. It's over. Issei yelled, taking one last shot aimed at the flaming head, whose flame had dimmed a lot during the battle. Once again, the shot was on target and the head went flying as the flame went out mid-air. Guayaya. A sharp scream came out of the head while the whole body began to crumble. Faster than he had appeared, the headless horseman disappeared into dust. Sigh. Issei could finally breathe easy now that the fight was over. His boosts reached the limit and were undone, making him fall to the ground, with his legs having no strength left. He was sweating thick drops and breathing heavily. Suddenly, he felt two arms hug him as he was lifted up. "Great job, Ice-kun," Kushina told him, smiling as she carried him. It was impossible for Issei's face not to turn completely red, but at that moment, he was quite happy. Chapter 3. The Stray Necromancer and the Red Dragon. It's a decent sword. I already wanted you to learn to fight with one anyway, so this is a good weapon to make use of. Having said that, I don't think you'll be able to use it during raiding games. Kushina said, clearly pleased with the sword her pawn had acquired. Her smile made Issei both happy and even more eager to make her proud. Drake did not fail to notice the obsession and dependence that his user was forming with the red-haired devil, but decided not to interfere for the moment. Why not? The Sekiryuite asked, curious and a little disappointed. Is very dangerous and way outside the standards of acceptable weapons in games. Notably, Issei was disappointed with that. All the work to get that weapon and he can't even make use of it in the raiding games. Kushina didn't fail to notice his disappointment. Stop. She spoke, clapping her hands on Issei's cheeks and then squeezing and stretching them. You did very well. Who cares if you can't use the sword in a stupid game? You can use it in literally any other situation and you defeated that thing in a quick and practical manner, I'm proud. And that was all Issei needed to feel better. Thank you, Kushina-sama. He noticed his mistake as soon as he finished speaking. What did I say? She asked with her arms crossed and an unnecessarily serious expression. No use of expressions of superiority with you. Kushina's serious expression is soon replaced by a huge smile. That's right. Now go take a shower and sleep while I go drink. At least his master's actions brought a smile to his face. And Kushina wasn't naive. She could see how Issei's dependence on her was slowly growing, as well as his apparent obsession with not letting her down or anything like that. We will deal with one thing at a time. She thought to herself as she looked for a bottle of any alcoholic beverage. It didn't take long for them to get back to their normal routine for that week. However, there was a small detour that needed to be made. Kushina had received a request, which was a simple way of saying order, from the superiors of the Devil Society. Apparently, there was a stray, a demon who rebelled against their master, who was an expert in magic, particularly necromancy. At the moment he was near a small village in an isolated part of Europe outside the church's territory, making it the devil's problem. Normally this would be a walk in the park for Kushina, but she had something to consider now. Ice-kun, I won't ask you to go with me or to do something. I know that for you, facing a stray now can be too much, so it's up to you if you want to come with me or not. The two were on the porch of the inn that Kushina had rented. It had only been a few minutes since she had been informed of the request. Issei gulped and looked outside, seeing a small village in the distance, with people walking by, going about their day. He looked at the people and the families, his eyes landing on a small family, with a mother, a father, and a son. The brown-haired one felt something moving in him. Sadness, longing, but also. No. He starts talking, and Kushina silently heard him. I'm scared, and the thought of finding something like that, memories that he struggled to suppress, threatened to return to his mind now. But, I don't want to let a bastard like him out there. Please, let me do this, Kushina. The Redi didn't know which decision was better, especially after looking into Issei's eyes. When they had been told that it was a remote village, both master and servants still underestimated how remote it was. The locations whose concentration of humans exceeded the total of 5 were hours and hours away, and the smallest of cities was at least a full day away by car. At least magic was very convenient. They were outside the village, hidden behind some trees, though it wasn't necessary since a dense fog covered the region. Issei at that moment finally felt the result of everything he had gone through in the last few days and his transformation into a devil, because he felt how bizarre the atmosphere around him was. Everything felt out of place, and at the same time, he couldn't put his finger on what was causing it. Should we talk to the locals? To Issei's question, Kushina shook her head. No, it's better to avoid contact. People in this type of place are especially superstitious. Besides, our goal is not here. She spoke, looking somewhere beyond the village. Despite being able to see through the mist, Issei didn't understand where she was looking. Focus your senses, use your aura to enhance them. Braig's voice sounded in his head and Issei did as suggested, closing his eyes and concentrating on himself. He used the draconic aura to understand what was in the direction Kushina was looking at. It was when it hit him. It felt like a cold wind colliding against his body, resulting in a shiver running down his spine. A pile of negative feelings such as arrogance, fear, resentment and despair was thick in the atmosphere. It was as if whatever was in that direction rejected not only positive feelings but also any living thing. Issei didn't notice that he gulped instinctively or the cold sweat that went down his forehead. In his mind, there was only one thing. The memories before his family was attacked. They were at the park, it was supposed to be just a picnic, his dad even had called him to go fishing after all this time. They were having fun, and then, that same feeling hit him. A prey that caught the predator's attention. Partner, take a deep breath. You are not there anymore, remember who you are with, what you are doing, and what you want. Come on, take it easy. Issei didn't notice the boosted gear suddenly appearing on his arm, nor did he notice that the gear's green gem was glowing brightly. With Drake's reminder snapping him out of his thoughts, Issei did as advised, and the glow dimmed. Ice-kun, you should go back. Kushina said, touching her pawn's arm. There was gentleness and concern in her voice, but clearly, it was more than a suggestion but a direct order. If he couldn't afford it, she couldn't take him along, after all, there was a risk that he might accidentally screw things up. Issei understood that, he knew that he wasn't in an ideal condition. However. Please. I need to try. If I mess up. Any punishment is. I won't complain. Despite the slightly hesitant words, Issei looked directly at his master, letting her understand through his eyes that making him back off now was not an option. Okay, but if things start to go wrong, I'll act. She spoke after sighing. In the end, the Redite agreed for two reasons. The possibility of this bringing some peace to her pawn, and because even if things started to go wrong, she could easily handle everything. Having finished their discussion, they moved through the trees. The path was clear and the fog was not an issue. It didn't take them more than a few minutes to get to the source of the problem. The target was a necromancer, so his location was somewhat obvious. The cemetery was a bit removed from the village, and the moment they laid eyes on it, they confirmed Stray's presence. This was only the second time Issei had run into one, and now he knew he was much more prepared. Still, the scene around him gave him an itch. All the tombs had been dug and different mounds of earth were visible on the ground. There weren't a lot of them, maybe 7 or 10. They were the rotting bodies of people. The flesh in the corpses varied in quantity, some still had a certain amount, even if very rotten, on their bones, while others were almost pure bone. Those that hadn't fully decayed still had parts of their organs sticking out, like one that had an eyeball hanging out of its socket, or another that had its gut sticking out, threatening to separate from its body at any moment. Issei knew that if it weren't for the last few days, this scene would probably be too much for him, and even with his new experiences, he had to hold on to what was in his stomach. Kushina had a look of disgust in her eyes, but it wasn't directed at the corpses. In fact, there was fury in the depths of her eyes caused by the scene in front of her. Issei looked at his master, noting the subtle change in her. He obviously understood that it had something to do with the scene in front of her, he just didn't understand why Kushina seemed, at least to his impression, so irritated by it. There was no expression on the Redite's face. Sarcasm, teasing, irritation, contempt, nothing. That scared the young dragon more than anything he could face. Corpses walked back and forth carrying different things in their hands. Pieces of bodies, animal bones, and different types of plants. Everyone was taking those things to the center of the cemetery, which wasn't very big by the way, where there was a man sitting on a wooden chair, with a cauldron at his side and several books scattered on the ground around him. His skin was as gray, and his body was thin like a corpse. The flesh seemed to stick to his skeleton, leaving the bones as obvious as possible. Issei was sure he could count the number of the man's ribs just from where he was standing. He had long white hair, but it was dirty and clearly unkempt. His fingernails were long and sharp, his teeth looked like fangs, and his eyes were completely dark with no pupil or sclera. Was he human before? The question could not be avoided by the Sekiryuite. It is not uncommon among more radical mages to experiment with themselves. This is especially useful with less orthodox magic users such as necromancy. Again Issei swallowed hard. Was this the kind of lunatic he would have to face? However, before he could feel any fear, a thought crossed his mind. What if someone did that to mom and dad? Again the boosted gear appeared on Issei's arm without him even having to call it out. In the corner of his eyes, this time he noticed the intense glow of the gem. I am going. He announces it to Kushina without ceremony as he walks to the entrance of the cemetery. There were no gates, the only thing that separated the place from the rest of the forest were small stone walls. Issei just passed through the walls, and in no time the corpses paid any attention to him. Blazer, for the crimes of killing a companion of your peerage, do you surrender? The stray looked up from the book in his hands for the first time. He didn't have any expression until he noticed what was on Issei's arm. Oh who, so the current Sekiryuite became a devil. Fantastic, fantastic, and I was still lucky that he came after me. Interesting, interesting. The laser leaped to his feet, throwing the book aside. Since he didn't have pupils it wasn't possible to be sure, but Issei knew he was looking right at him. He's clearly not up there in his head. Considering he has no intentions of surrendering. I know. Issei replied simply, raising his left arm. He ignored the cold feeling, which still bothered him, and took aim. Dragon shot. The draconic aura concentrated on the tip of the boosted gear's index finger and was shot toward the necromancer. The laser didn't move, just watched the approaching blow with what Kushina thought was curiosity. Before reaching Stray, however, two corpses jumped in front of him. The blow went through them, exploding the bodies, but still not stopping the attack. But they gave enough time for the laser to pull away. Even with his frail-looking body, as a devil, he still had strength and speed beyond what a normal human could dream of. Impressive, impressive. Devil's body, dragon strength and powers. Show me more, more. Contrary to what he said, his voice sounded flat. The Stray was incapable of showing emotion. You piece of shit, stay still. Issei on the other hand had his emotions as raw as ever. Even though those corpses were being controlled and had nothing to do with him, the same thought went through Issei's head. What if someone did that to mom and dad? I will kill you. The Sekiryute's draconic aura jumped out, covering his body. Boost. Night. With the extra speed and short space of the graveyard, Issei was soon in front of the necromancer. He raised his left arm, ready to punch the necromancer, who already had his palms open, with magic circles formed. It was only thanks to his newly acquired experiences and his current speed that Issei was able to run backward and dodge the two sharp pieces of bone that flew toward him. The dark green liquid oozed from the tips of the bones, the drops of which steamed out as soon as they touched the ground. Capable, capable. Even for a devil that would hurt. The laser spoke. He was satisfied with the fight he was getting. Reg. The Sekiryute called to the dragon in his soul to see if he had any explanation about those bones and the poison in them. The red dragon did not disappoint. Corpse poison. Using magic to accumulate the negative feelings of the dead and adding it to the natural liquids of decaying bodies is somewhat troublesome. With Drake's explanation, Issei now understood the shiver down his spine he felt seeing those bones. Come on Sekiryute, impress me, impress me. Two different magic circles appeared in the laser's hands, followed by 6 green flames, 3 on either side of the necromancer, forming in midair. They took shape and for a brief moment each of the flames showed a different face before finishing up forming skulls. I know, don't let them touch me. You're learning fast. Deciding it was best to stay as a knight, Issei used his speed to dodge the poison bones and phantom flames. Boost. Ignoring the second announcement, the Sekiryute thought of one thing. Why are you doing these things? He asked in visible frustration. Whenever he tried to approach the necromancer, bones or fire would force him to dodge. Hearing the Sekiryute's question, the laser makes a thoughtful expression. Well, when you make an omelet you break eggs. I'm doing the same thing. He spoke, shrugging casually. Even Kushina frowned at that. To Issei, that seemed to spark something in him. The cold that he felt since he arrived started to decrease. You're playing with the bodies of people loved by others, you killed your comrade, do you think this is breaking eggs? Every word came out through clenched teeth. His fists were clenched tightly together, his nails nearly ripping across his palm. Issei's draconic aura was amplified by his anger, and even the previously immobile corpses moved away from the Sekiryute's direction. But of course. I was suddenly curious to find out if there was any way to keep the evil pieces in the body after death. It didn't, but it was enlightening. He once again shrugged and continued. And these bodies are helping me with my research. As I said, Sekiryute, you are worrying too much about some eggs, things are much simpler. Something seemed to click in Issei's mind. Since the death of his parents, he blamed himself. Part of that was a result of looking for a reason. Why us? What could we have done? How could we avoid it? The laser's words made him understand. Sometimes things wouldn't have a reason, sometimes bad things would just happen. Sometimes there were beings like the one in front of him. Sparks ignited within the Sekiryute. The boosted gear's glow intensified and then returned all the way to the gem, with a high temperature rising from it. The surprise was evident in Kushina's eyes as she faced her pawn, and the enemy necromancer shared the same feeling. Interesting. The flame shot out of the boosted gear's gem. Its color looked like a mix of Kushina's hair color with the gear's original red. The fire spread, covering the gear, then the arm and finally covering Issei's entire body. Even from afar, the Redeed felt the intensity of the flames. Ice-kun isn't using demonic power for this, but his draconic aura. I was right, he actually has more compatibility as a dragon than as a devil. Boost. Following the third announcement, Issei moved toward the necromancer. The intense flames didn't seem to affect him negatively, on the contrary, he felt great. Bones and ghostly flames moved to stop him, but before they could even touch his skin, the crimson flames spread and intensified. Both Bones and Phantom Flames are engulfed by the Sekiryute's flame, resulting in their destruction. For the first time, the laser widened his eyes in surprise. He tried to move to escape, but his body couldn't keep up with Issei's speed. Issei's left fist, where the sacred gear is, went towards the necromancer's face, landing a full punch on the left cheek. The burning sound was followed by the sound of breaking bones. The laser's body flew for meters in the air before falling to the ground outside the graveyard, unconscious. If anyone tried to look at the body now, they would see a hole in the face, which still had smoke coming out of it from the burn. He was dead. The flames around Issei were slowly fading. He didn't even have time to go after the laser's body when immense fatigue hit him. His eyes felt heavy, and his body clearly begged for rest. He started to sway and would have fallen to the ground if Kushina hadn't hugged him. "Great job, Ice-kun, you can rest now." He felt her running her hands through his hair. At that moment, Issei sure was satisfied. Chapter 4. The Queen and the Bishop. Issei was wearing a robe in a luxurious hotel room that seemed to him as big as half of his house. In the direction opposite to his was his master, Kushina Gremory. And together with them, there were two other women, one on Issei's side, the other on Kushina's side, each paired on opposite sides of the table. The woman on Kushina's side was a blonde with short hair, large breasts, and an attitude as strong as the Sekiryute's master. The one on Issei's side also had short hair, but of dark color, and her silhouette wasn't as pronounced as the others. These were respectively the Kushin's queen, Tsunade's seer, and one of the Kushina's bishops, Shizune. "What is it, master, are you going to ask for a break?" Tsunade spoke, referring to Kushina with a mocking tone that demonstrated their strong friendship. That still surprised Issei a little, as even subconsciously or not, he tried to distance himself from any idea that he could treat Kushina as an equal. The Redeed in question had already realized this and was slowly working on this issue the Sekiryute had. "Never." Kushina yelled with determination, slamming her large glass of alcohol on the table. "Ha, that's what we'll see." Tsunade declared excitedly, downing another full glass of sake. Kushina soon followed to do the same, the two of them fully focused on their little competition. "I'm sorry about this, Issei-san, it's been a while since they met, and when this happens they always act like that," Shizune said, with a weak smile and a slightly embarrassed expression. But Issei couldn't help but laugh a bit. "No, it's great. Seeing Kushina having fun like that is new to me," he says with a sincere smile, and even though he was drinking, Kushina saw it and could tell it was one of the most sincere expressions of happiness she had seen from Issei so far. "Yufu, I see you also have problems getting used to casually referring to her," Shizune commented when she noticed the pause that Issei gave in his sentence. The Sekiryute couldn't help but smile a little sheepishly at her having pointed out that fact. "Yeah, it's still a bit disconcerting," he says, scratching the back of his head and looking away from the short-haired one. "It's okay, I also had a hard time getting used to it at first." Shizune spoke with a smile, trying to ease how tense the brownish looked. It was clear he wasn't used to acting casual anymore. "Seriously?" he asked in surprise, to which Shizune nodded in confirmation while smiling. "Yes. You know, Kushina-sen is much more casual than most other high-class masters, so it took me a while to get used to not having to be so formal. At least when there is no one from outside. Either way, don't worry too much about it, Issei-kun, you'll get used to it in time." Issei didn't know if he wanted to get used to it, and that thought was foreign to him. Getting used to this kind of thing should be normal, so why did it feel so weird? His concern, however, went unnoticed by Shizune. "Devil's biology is awesome and all, but we've got plans for tomorrow starting early, so why don't you all go to sleep?" After downing another cup of sake, Tsunade proposed, pointing the cup at Shizune and Issei. "No, Tsunade-san, I don't need you telling me when to go to sleep," Shizune said, pouting at the blonde. Tsunade, however, just laughed at her. "Okay, I'm a little tired anyway." Issei, however, didn't hesitate in agreeing, even giving a weak smile as he scratched the back of his head. That made Shizune sigh, accepting her defeat. "It was great meeting you, Tsunade-san. Good night, Kushina-san," the Sekiryute said, bowing to the two before leaving the room. If they noticed his flushed face after his eyes glanced over Tsunade's breasts, no one said anything. "See you tomorrow." Shizune, on the other hand, acted far less formally. Soon only Kushina and Tsunade were left in the room. There was a prolonged moment of silence between the two until the blonde finally spoke. "There's no way you couldn't have noticed, right?" Kushina sighs and scratches the back of her head. "It's obvious, but I don't know, I didn't really know what to do." Tsunade sighed. She wasn't very judgmental of her master and friend, the Redeed just did what she thought was best for the boy at the time. "What did they do to his parents?" she asks to get a better understanding of the situation. We managed to bury them, it was fast thanks to Riaz-chan, but there wasn't much to bury. Iridide spoke, with a sad look, as she turned her head to the outside of the room. Tsunade clicked her tongue, not resigned that two normal people had lost their lives because of what was probably an oversight of the devils. He doesn't have many relatives. His grandmother died a few years ago, shortly after his grandfather, and the rest are distant relatives who are not even in Japan anymore. Tsunade just sighed. Do you know which stray was it? The blonde asked curiously. No. There wasn't much left of it either. The master spoke, as she took another sip of her drink. Even though she did not pity the stray, that was a little disconcerting to know. The queen furrowed her eyebrows and looked back in the direction where Issei had gone. How? Unfortunately, all Kushina could do was shake her head. I don't know. All this time with him, and I'm sure that before, well, Issei was just a normal boy, although I hear he's a little more perverted than the others. That last part made Tsunade laugh. Nothing out of the ordinary for his age. And anyway, humans have very low standards for what is perverted. She said, drinking some more straight from the bottle. Either way, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so I don't know how he decimated the stray to almost nothing. Kushina finished speaking with a sigh. There was something about it that bothered her. It wasn't like she thought Issei was keeping some dark secret or anything, but something about this story didn't sit well with the Gremory. It's possible he's repressing memories. As one, if not Kushina's best friend, Tsunade knew exactly what was going through her master's mind. Yeah, maybe. The possibility had crossed Iridide's mind, but having Tsunade, a doctor with some experience even in the psychological part, helped to be more sure about it. Anyway, that's the kind of thing we need to deal with later. For now, we have another matter, don't we? The queen said with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, I know. Kushina replied, scratching her head. He's too dependent on you. In a not too healthy way. Tsunade spoke with her brows furrowed. And you think I didn't notice? But I don't want him to get hurt again. Hearing her master's speech, the blonde raises an eyebrow. Wouldn't you happen that you are? Seeing myself in Issei, Kushina interrupts Tsunade, confirming the queen's thoughts. You didn't see him when we first met. He was just like me after Minato, you know. Tsunade nodded in understanding and said nothing more, noticing that Kushina wanted to continue. But I had my family to help me. Issei. He has a dragon in his soul that will probably be the reason for his death due to a rivalry that has nothing to do with him. Iridide finished by saying, slamming her hands on the table in frustration. After hearing how her best friend saw the whole situation involving the Sekiryuite, Tsunade spent a few seconds staring at the bottom of her cup, thoughtful. Unlike me, Shizune specializes in mental health care. She can help him. Tsunade said, placing a hand on Kushina's shoulder, who smiled in relief. It would be great for him. She knew that with the right help, Issei would soon be better. After all, even in the short time they had been together, Kushina was the person who best understood just how strong the chestnut could be. Kushina did a good job preparing you. Tsunade spoke with a smug expression as she passed Issei a bottle of water. He was sitting on the ground with his face covered in sweat and his back against a tree. Why yes. He said, taking the bottle and drinking it slowly, controlling the urge not to drink it all at once. The Sekiryuite had just run up and down a mountain. 10 times in a single hour. While he carried magic bracelets made to increase his weight. To say the least, it was quite a challenge. Interesting. On Issei's side, Shizune crouched down and brought her face close to his neck, glaring intently at the boy, who was naturally disconcerted. Hey Shizune-san. Tsunade rolls her eyes and pulls the girl back, who, realizing what she's doing, blushes and gives an embarrassed laugh. Sorry Issei-kun. It's just that I noticed that you look a little different from a normal reincarnated devil. The boy makes an understanding expression and looks down at his arms. Kushina-san said something about that. I have very little demonic energy, but a lot of draconic energy. Should be it. He said with a smile, making the two understand that, somehow, this seemed to be the best thing for Haidu. Interesting. Tsunade muttered, thinking of a few other things. She could only think of another reincarnated devil who had dragon powers, but this one was already a dragon king. Issei was still taking his first steps in this world, and his growth would apparently be much more unpredictable than they expected. She was suddenly even more motivated to see where the current Sekiryuite could go. Let's continue. Meaning it was time to get back to training. Yes. At the same time, Issei replied, already getting up. After starting the day with a run, the chestnut followed the training with a series of 100 push-ups repeated 10 times, with only a 10-second pause between each. This while he leaned between 4 rocks above a river with a strong current. Next was a series of upside-down sit-ups on the edge of a hill. A simple squat while holding a table-sized rock, and so on. When Kushina said that the training would be extreme, he already expected something that would push him to the limit, but even with his devil body, if it wasn't for the week traveling with his master, having all kinds of experience and preparation, he wouldn't have endured anything from that. See? Shizu nods to her mentor's question. Had you noticed that before, Kushina? Tsunade asks her master, who was also watching Issei's training. I hadn't paid attention. The three were talking about the same thing, something they had never seen before. As Issei trained, his draconic energy assimilated even more into his body as it entered his muscles, bones, and organs, strengthening them at a much higher rate than they already were due to the exercises and his devil's physiology. Reincarnate the Sekiryuite, huh? I think only a Gremory would be that crazy. Tsunade spoke, making Kushina laugh. None of them knew what changes would come from having the Red Dragon Emperor as a devil, but undeniably, they were looking forward to seeing it. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.